When we first started talking about pods and deployments about a dozen videos or so ago, you might recall that I opened up my terminal at some point in time and I told you that I was going to run a series of commands. And I also told you don't try to run these commands. I told you don't run these because you're probably going to see an error message or something like that. And so one of the commands that I ran at that point in time was a simple docker ps. Remember, the docker ps commands will print out the status of all the different containers that are running on your local machine. So you saw me run this command, and when I did so, there appeared to be a tremendous number of containers running on my local machine. Now, if you open up your terminal right now and you run a docker ps as well, you're probably only going to see like maybe 0, 1, 2, or 3 local containers. And chances are there are going to be containers that we had started up in previous sections that you never cleaned up or anything like that. So why am I seeing this output right here of all these different containers? And if you look at the name of them, they all appear to be very clearly related to Kubernetes. So why am I seeing all this output right here? And why are you only seeing 1 or 2 or 3? Well, in this section, we're going to investigate this a little bit. We're going to get a better idea of what Docker is doing for us, both on our local computer and inside of that virtual machine that forms our node. And we're going to get a better idea of how we can kind of reach into the node and play around with the copy of Docker inside there. All right, so first off, couple diagrams. Now we've looked at some variations on this diagram right here a couple times, and we've gone over the process of what happens when we feed in a config file through kubectl a couple times as well. But I want to give you just one more quick reminder of what's going on. So remember, we take a configuration file that wants to create either a pod or a deployment. We feed that into kubectl. That gets passed off to the master, and then the master reaches into the virtual machine and communicates with a copy of Docker that runs only inside of the virtual machine. And it tells it, hey, Docker client, we need to create a new container. Go off and grab this image and create a container out of it. The Docker client then turns around and says to the Docker server, hey, Docker server, we need to go and grab an image and we need to create a container out of it. And so it's then up to the Docker server to reach out to Docker Hub, download an image, store it inside of some local cache, and then build a container out of it. Again, we've gone over this flow several times. Now, something else that we've discussed a couple times is the fact that we have 2 copies of Docker running on your local machine right now. We have the copy of Docker that's running inside of the virtual machine, and we have the copy of Docker that we installed way back at the start of this course when we ran Docker for Mac or Docker for Windows. That's the copy of Docker that's associated with this status bar dropdown right here. All right, now I want to show you something really interesting. All right, I'm going to flip back over to my terminal, and inside of this terminal window right here, I'm going to run docker ps again. When I run that, you're going to see, yep, I've got all this output from Docker right here. And now I'm going to open up another terminal window. So here's just another simple terminal window over here, and I'm going to do a docker ps over here as well. And when I do it over here, it appears that I'm running absolutely no containers whatsoever. So what's going on here? Well, essentially, I have configured Docker inside of these 2 terminal windows to connect to one of these different Docker servers that's running on my local computer. So whenever I type in a command inside my terminal, I'm accessing the copy of Docker client that was set up with Docker for Mac when I installed it way earlier inside this course. My first terminal window over here, this one where I run docker ps and I see no running containers whatsoever, this copy of the Docker client, or the Docker CLI, is connecting to the Docker server that is running on my local computer. And again, this is the copy of Docker server that was installed with Docker for Mac. In the second terminal window, I bet you can guess what's going on. In the second terminal window over here, I have configured my local copy of Docker client not to connect to my local Docker server. Instead, I have reconfigured it to talk to the copy of Docker server running inside of the virtual machine. So inside of this very specific terminal window right here, when I do a docker ps, my copy of Docker client, the Docker CLI, is reaching into the virtual machine. It's getting in contact with the copy of Docker server inside there, and it's asking it, hey, what different containers are you running? And so that's why inside of this terminal window right here, I see this big list of Kubernetes related containers, including the multi-client container right here. And again, all these containers are running inside of my virtual machine. All right, so again, the idea here, all I want you to understand right now is that I have one copy of Docker client, and between these two terminal windows, I have configured it to either talk to my local copy of Docker server or the copy of Docker server that is running inside of the virtual machine. So let's take a quick pause right here. Now that we understand that, when we come back in the next section, I'm going to show you how you can reconfigure your local copy of Docker client to talk to Docker server inside the virtual machine. And of course, I'll also tell you why we would want to do this at all. All right, so quick break, and we'll come back in the next section.